Welcome to This Feels Familiar. I'm your host, Minaa B. I'm a therapist, author, and creator of the Siblinghood Theory. And on this show, we explore the themes of belonging, conflict, and relational patterns shaping your life. So let's dive in. Have you ever been in a relationship where something small happens, like a delayed text, a disagreement, a moment where someone pulls away, and suddenly your reaction feels bigger than the moment itself? You start to feel anxious, defensive, and you even feel like you have to protect yourself. And part of you knows this isn't just about what's happening right now. That familiar feeling, the one that says, I've been here before, isn't random, it's a pattern. And that's what I want to talk to you about today, because that pattern is that we don't realize the ways we bring old wounds into new relationships. And that's why when these small moments happen, you feel anxious, you feel defensive, your nervous system starts to become extremely dysregulated because you might be thinking to yourself, I've been here before and I don't like how this feels. So, today we're going to explore why we bring old wounds into relationships, how to recognize when it's happening, how it sabotages connections, but most importantly, how to stop it. Before we go any further, I do want to normalize something. Everyone brings a past into relationships. Every relationship you've ever had, that includes family, siblings, friendships, romantic partners, those relationships teaches your brain something about connection, what love looks and feels like, what conflict means, what happens when you express a need, and what it takes to belong. Those experiences shape what psychologists call relational schemas, which are mental frameworks we use to interpret relationship experiences. So when you enter a new relationship, you're not starting with a blank slate. You're starting with a nervous system full of memories about connections. And those memories often show up automatically. So, why does this happen? Because it's usually not intentional. People don't wake up and think to themselves, let me sabotage this relationship with unresolved emotional pain. That's not what's happening. What actually is happening is much more human than that. The first thing that's happening is very simple. Your brain is trying to protect you. Your brain is wired to detect threats, and relational pain, betrayal, abandonment, rejection is something the brain remembers very well. Research shows that the brain prioritizes remembering painful experiences in order to prevent them from happening again. If you don't feel the weight of that sentence, then man, that must mean that you probably had of the privilege of being able to avoid hardship and difficult experiences in life, because what a sentence. To me, that is extremely powerful to know that our bodies are wired so much for survival that it will literally prioritize pain in order to help us prevent pain from happening again. So if someone has been hurt before, their brain becomes hyper aware of signs that it could happen again. So that means you might interpret neutral behavior as rejection. I see examples of this all the time when somebody takes too long to respond to a text message, especially if you have a habit of talking to this person and they do respond swiftly. But let's say you had a disagreement, or let's say you found yourself speaking up and it was really, really hard for you to say what you had to say, but you sent the text anyway. And now an hour goes by. 2 hours, 3 hours, half the day has passed, and you're like, oh my God, they don't want to be my friend anymore. You're freaking out. And it just so happened that they were probably at work, or their phone was on Do Not Disturb, or they were taking a nap. There are so many different things that could have been happening, but your brain is already interpreting the worst case scenario. So, this is when we start to assume someone's intentions are awful. We start to say, instead of being neutral and thinking of things through a lens of the gray area, by recognizing that life is not always black and white. Sometimes things can be happening that I am not privy to. There are things that can be happening that I just don't know about. So let me just be neutral here because the situation here is neutral. But no, you become defensive quickly. And that is because your brain is trying to say, let's not get hurt again. But sometimes that protective instinct misfires. Another reason why this happens in our relationships is that old attachment patterns are still active. Attachment theory helps explain why early relational experiences shape how we behave in adult relationships. So, if your early relationships taught you that connection was unpredictable or conditional, you might develop patterns like anxious attachment, which is fearing abandonment. So, you're chronically seeking reassurance. Somebody telling you that they like you might not feel good enough. You need it to be shown and you need it to be repeated over and over and over again for you to believe it. But the thing is, you never really believe it because you have a core anxious attachment wound. Another pattern can look like avoidant attachment, which is distancing yourself from people to stay emotionally safe. So you crave connection, but you're also deeply afraid of connection. These patterns don't disappear automatically when you meet someone new. Understand that just because you met someone new and just because you like that person doesn't mean that the patterns that you hold will disappear. They're going to show up in your relationships, and they're also going to show up when relationships start to matter because you care about this thing now. You care about the relationship, but you also care about the person. And so it can be really, really difficult to suppress those patterns, but that's not the goal. The goal is to work through those patterns. The third thing is your nervous system remembers what your mind forgets. Even when you intellectually know someone isn't the person who hurt you before, your body might still react as if the threat is present. Trauma researchers often describe this as implicit memory, memories stored in the body rather than conscious thought. That's why you might react strongly to something small because your nervous system is responding to history, not just the moment. So this is why people can get very triggered in relationships because it's not really the person. Sometimes it's, I've been here before, my body remembers this feeling and I don't like feeling this way. So if your partner, for example, has a habit of doing something while that you just don't like while you're in an argument, for example, you might think that this person is just going to leave me or abandon me. And that may not be true, but your body has been in that moment before. And so your body might convince you to believe that this is what the outcome is going to be. And remember, we want to protect ourselves. So we will do everything that we can to protect ourselves. The other thing is that familiar dynamics can feel strangely comfortable. This is something I talk a lot about through the siblinghood theory. Early peer relationships, especially the relationships with your siblings, teach us important lessons about belonging. Who gets attention in the home, who competes more, who accommodates, who withdraws. Those dynamics can become relational roles that follow us into adulthood. And even when those roles aren't healthy, they can feel familiar. Humans often recreate familiar relationship patterns, even painful ones, because familiarity feels predictable. So sometimes we bring old wounds into relationships because those are patterns that feel like home. It's also patterns that we already know how to navigate because we survived them. Even though those patterns left deep wounds and they were painful and they were traumatic and they were awful, we survived them. So we sometimes say to ourselves, I guess I can survive this again. Or we might say, I don't know if I can survive this again. And so this is how your nervous system is wired. It's wired to protect you. It's wired to keep you safe, but also your nervous system can become dysregulated through familiar patterns, even if that's not what's actually happening in the present. Even if that person's behavior is not the same as your sister's behavior, your brother or your mother's, if it feels slightly familiar, it can cause you to shut down. It can cause you to have a particular type of reaction that may not serve you or the relationships you're trying to build. So I want to share with you some signs that you're bringing old wounds into a relationship because a lot of people don't know when this is happening. So it's important to pay attention to when it does start happening so that you can begin doing the work to manage those wounds. The first sign is you react strongly to small triggers. Examples of that could be a delayed text message feels like rejection, a disagreement feels like the relationship is at risk. People might even tell you that the emotional reaction feels bigger than the situation. Even your demeanor and how you respond to certain things might show that your reaction is a bit disproportionate to what's actually happening in reality. Another thing that happens is you assume the worst. Instead of asking questions, your brain jumps to conclusions. So you might start saying, they're losing interest in me. They're going to leave me. They don't care about me. These assumptions often come from past experiences, not current evidence. You struggle to trust even when someone is trustworthy. Your partner may be consistent, communicative, emotionally present, and there may have been no signs at all of some sense of betrayal in your relationship, but part of you still expects the relationship to fall apart. And that is because trust can feel risky if you are used to being in relationships where you are betrayed, where your vulnerability is used against you, or where people just harm you and you're left with this feeling of chronic disappointment and sadness. Another thing that you do is that you might test a relationship because some people unconsciously test their partners. They may withdraw to see if their partner chases them, start arguments, push people away emotionally. These tests often come from fear. If they stay after this, then I'll know they care. But testing your partner is not healthy. It just puts you and the relationship in a dynamic that shows that trust is not being built and ruptures are chronically piling up. You replay past relationship stories. Another sign is when your past experiences start to dominate your thinking. So you might think to yourself, well, my ex cheated, so I can't trust anyone, or every relationship ends the same. Everybody is going to treat me poorly. These narratives will shape how you interpret new relationships. And so when unresolved pain drives behavior, it can quietly damage relationships. It creates misinterpretation. You might misread neutral behavior as harmful or as rejection. Your partner may feel confused because their intentions don't match your interpretation. It also creates defensive communication. If you're expecting to be hurt, you may communicate defensively. Instead of curiosity, the conversation now becomes protective, and over time, that can create tension. It also prevents emotional safety. Relationships thrive when both people feel safe being vulnerable. But if past wounds keep you guarded or reactive, it becomes harder to build that safety because you're not being open. It also creates self-fulfilling prophecies. Sometimes the fear of abandonment leads people to behave in ways that push others away, not intentionally, but protectively. And when the relationship struggles, it can reinforce the belief, see, relationships always end like this. But that's because you're not doing the introspective work to recognize the behaviors you're engaging in that causes the relationship to always end like this. So how can you stop bringing all wounds into relationships? Because this is the part that many people want answers for. And the truth is the process takes awareness and practice, but it is possible. So the first thing that you can do is develop pattern awareness. You can't change a pattern you don't recognize. So start noticing when strong emotional reactions show up. Ask yourself, is this about what's happening now or something that feels familiar? Pattern awareness creates space between your reaction and your behavior. The next thing you need to do is learn how to regulate your nervous system. When past wounds are activated, your nervous system goes into threat mode. Before responding, try regulating your body. You can do little things like slow breathing, deep breathing, right? Different breathing exercises. You can take yourself on a walk or even go to the gym to move your body. You can learn to pause before responding to messages. And so if you're texting someone, maybe set an alarm for 10 minutes before you respond. Also do different grounding exercises. And so sometimes we need to just focus on our senses. You can say, what are 5 things that I can see in the room right now that are the color blue? What do I feel against my body? What do I smell in this moment? Other tricks that I really love to use is tapping into what's actually familiar but also healthy. So for example, Rewatching TV shows can actually be a very, very healthy way to regulate your nervous system. And that is because when the body is so overwhelmed, it's looking for comfort. It's looking for something that is familiar. So you want to feed your nervous system something that it's used to and something that can activate happy memories, right? So if there is a show that you really, really love, for example, I love the TV show Girlfriends. It's nostalgic for me. It reminds me of my past. I know every single episode. Some of them I know word by word. And so when I'm stressed, or I'm dysregulated, I'll just throw Girlfriends on and let it play in the background of my home because it helps to regulate my body. I already know what's going to happen. And so redundancy can be something that really stabilizes you. And research shows that emotional regulation helps reduce reactive responses in relationships. And so if you're dysregulated because of a disagreement or some sort of relational conflict, tap into the things that are familiar and healthy. That's the key word. Don't tap into things that are familiar but damaging to your body and dysfunctional. Tap into things that you know your nervous system is going to thank you for it. Oh, this feels really good. Thank you for turning on the show. Thank you for cooking the meal that we had last night so that you're not giving your brain more things to think about and reducing cognitive load. Thank you for calling that familiar friend who always helps to get you to a place of regulation. That is what it looks like to lean into comfort and lean into familiarity, but it also be healthy for your growth. The next thing that you need to do is separate your past from your present. One helpful exercise is asking yourself, is my partner behaving like the people who hurt me before? Sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes the answer is no. Recognizing that difference can help recalibrate your response because if the answer is no, then well, that means that you have to be introspective here and ask yourself, why am I reacting this way? But if the answer is yes, then that means you have data to help you understand why you're reacting this way. And then the next step is for you to figure out how you want to navigate the relationship itself if it is hurting you. The next thing that you need to do is communicate vulnerability instead of defensiveness. So instead of reacting with accusation or withdrawal, try expressing the deeper emotion. For example, instead of saying to them, why didn't you text me back? It took you 6 hours to write me back. And I already know that you're probably not working. I already know enough about your job to know you have a lot of downtime. That is defensiveness. Instead, what you can say is, oh, when I didn't hear from you, I noticed I started to feel anxious. I think I tapped into some old fears about being ignored. And understand that you are saying this to yourself. You don't need to tell somebody every single thought that you're having. Okay, so the thing that you might need to do is recognize I feel anxious in my body right now. Some old fears are coming up, but this is for me to process. Now, if you already did become defensive, then you can hold yourself accountable by also saying this out loud to the person. But I think it's really important for you to recognize there's going to be moments for vulnerability that you do share, and there's moments where you can be vulnerable with yourself and say, oh, shoot, I recognized why I'm reacting this way and I need to process it, but I don't need to necessarily go and tell that person. This kind of communication builds understanding rather than conflict in relationships. Another thing I want you to do is challenge scarcity thinking. Many people stay trapped in relational fear because they believe connection is scarce. But healthy relationships are built through mutual effort and emotional safety. You don't have to accept dynamics that keep reopening old wounds. The next thing, however, is you do need to do the deeper healing work because sometimes old wounds require intentional healing. That might look like going to therapy and really processing your old wounds and old relational patterns with a therapist. Sometimes journaling about past relational patterns and how they're showing up currently can be helpful. I also encourage you to explore your childhood and your sibling dynamics because often when I'm doing this work with people, they focus on their past romantic relationships and they don't realize that the reason why they're so deeply triggered in their romantic relationships is because it's actually impacting and reactivating a wound that your sibling may have caused. It could be a wound your parent caused. It may not be your ex at all. It might be a particular family dynamic that you just have not paid attention to and maybe thought it was irrelevant because it's your family. But every relationship leaves a mark on us. So I want you to know that healing doesn't erase the past, but it changes how much power the past has over the present. I also want you to allow yourself to experience new relational outcomes. One of the most powerful ways to heal relational wounds is through corrective experiences. So, this means experiencing relationships where conflict doesn't mean abandonment. You can have ruptures in a relationship and repair them. This can also look like vulnerability that is met with care versus minimization or accusation. Another thing is understanding that belonging isn't conditional. Over time, these experiences can help your nervous system learn something new. So, if you've ever noticed yourself reacting to a partner in ways that feel bigger than the moment, understand that you're responding from a history of experiences that taught your brain how relationships work. But those patterns are not permanent. The goal here isn't to erase your past. The goal is to recognize when your past is influencing your present and to choose a different response. Because the moment you begin to recognize the pattern, you also begin creating the possibility for something new. So, if this episode resonated with you, please make sure you subscribe, leave a 5-star review, and make sure you share it with a friend because this helps me grow my show. Also, if you want to keep learning from me, you can order my book, Owning Our Struggles. You can also subscribe to my newsletter, All the Hard Things, on Substack. And if you've ever had that strange feeling that a relationship dynamic feels familiar, that's exactly what we explore on this show. Because when we understand our relational patterns, we gain the power to change them. Until next time.